Oh my God. Someone call 911.
In the heart of New Orleans, where the night hums with distant jazz and the air tastes of rain and river dust, a grand charity gala unfolds beneath chandeliers and flashbulbs. The city's elite gather in glittering gowns and polished suits, men who built empires, women who carried secrets. Among them is Edward Crane, a name that once symbolized unstoppable ambition. At 60, his temples silvered, his voice heavy with command, he still holds the air of a man used to being obeyed. But tonight, something in his gaze falters, the faint trembling of a hand that once shaped fortunes. She does not belong to this world of diamond laughter and rehearsed smiles. She belongs to the other side of New Orleans, the side where walls leak during the rain and dreams are whispered so softly they barely survive the night. As she passes the entrance, a sudden commotion stirs the air, a murmur, a gasp. A man collapses, his glass shattering like a gunshot against the floor. It's Edward Crane. At first, no one moves. The guests, frozen in disbelief, exchange glances as if waiting for someone more qualified to act. Security hesitates, the orchestra falters, and in the silence that follows, the man's body trembles once before going still. Then, Naomi drops her tray. She rushes forward, kneeling beside him. Her trembling hands press against his chest as she checks for a pulse, faint, irregular. She begins CPR, her voice calm but urgent. "Come on, sir, breathe. Please breathe." Her palms move rhythmically, her breath steady despite the chaos around her. She doesn't notice the cameras now flashing, capturing the image of a poor black waitress bent over one of the richest men in Louisiana. She doesn't notice the whispers, only the weak flutter beneath her hands. Minutes stretch like hours then, a cough, a gasp. Edward Crane's eyes flicker open, confused, distant, meeting hers for a single moment. "Who are you?" he breathes weakly. "Just someone trying to help," Naomi replies, her voice low but firm. He closes his eyes again as medics rush in, pushing her aside. The crowd parts, murmuring in disbelief. A billionaire saved by a waitress, the irony hangs thick in the air. Later, as Naomi stands outside the gala, rain drizzling over her uniform, she watches the ambulance lights fade into the distance. Her reflection in the wet pavement trembles like a memory she hasn't lived in yet. And deep inside her, a strange pull, something unspoken, as if fate had just brushed her shoulder and whispered, "This is only the beginning." The rain followed Naomi home that night, tracing the rusted rooftops of Treem, one of New Orleans' oldest neighborhoods, a place where time and hardship move hand in hand. The streets were slick with reflection, the glow of street lamps trembled in puddles like flickering memories. Naomi climbed the narrow staircase to a small apartment above a closed laundromat. The hallway smelled faintly of detergent and old plaster. She turned the key softly, not to wake her mother. Inside, the world was small but clean, a single worn sofa, faded curtains, and the hum of an oxygen machine that filled the air like a heartbeat. Her mother, Clara Brooks, lay asleep on a recliner, wrapped in a quilt patched with years of stories. Her face, once beautiful and strong, was pale beneath the soft glow of a table lamp. Beside her, a half-finished sketch of a magnolia flower rested on the coffee table, Naomi's quiet attempt at hope. Naomi slipped off her damp shoes, tiptoed into the kitchenette, and set a paper bag of leftovers on the counter. The fridge rattled, nearly empty save for a carton of milk and a few apples. She filled a cup with water, took a sip, then let out a slow breath. It had been another long day, one job at the diner, one at the hotel, and now the gala. She'd earned enough to cover rent and maybe a few of her mother's medicines. But she was exhausted, not the kind of tired that sleep could fix, the kind that sits deep in the soul. As she turned to check on her mother, Clara stirred. Her eyes fluttered open, tired, but still carrying that same gentle warmth. "Naomi, had known all her life. "Baby," her voice rasped softly, "I am here. Mama just got home," Naomi whispered, kneeling beside her. Clara smiled faintly. "You been working too hard again. You'll wear yourself thin." Naomi brushed a strand of grey hair from her mother's face. "Somebody's gotta keep this place running." Clara chuckled weakly. "You sound just like your father." Naomi's hands froze for a moment, that word, like a shadow always waiting in the corner. She'd never met her father. Clara had always said he was a good man once, but life had its way of changing people. All Naomi knew was that he'd left before she could walk. His name was never spoken, only hinted at in sighs and unfinished sentences. "Mama," Naomi asked quietly, "was my father rich?" Clara's eyes moved to the window, where raindrops rolled down like tears. "He had money," she said slowly, "but not the kind that matters." Naomi frowned. "What do you mean?" "He didn't know how to love what he couldn't buy." Silence fell between them, heavy but not bitter. Naomi took her mother's hand, thin, frail, but still warm. "I saved a man tonight," Naomi said finally. "At that fancy charity thing, he fainted, heart attack, maybe. I did CPR until the medics came." Clara's eyes widened a little. "You saved somebody. Lord, look at you." She smiled weakly. "Maybe that's why God gave you my stubborn heart." Naomi laughed softly, the sound breaking the tension in the air. "Yeah, maybe." But as she spoke, something inside her stirred, an unease she couldn't name. The man's face, pale under the ballroom lights, his trembling hand, that weak whisper, "Who are you?" It echoed in her mind like a question meant for more than that night. Outside, thunder rolled in the distance. Naomi turned off the lamp, kissed her mother's forehead, and whispered, "Rest now, Mama. Later." Lying in bed near the window, Naomi watched lightning flash across the skyline. Her mind drifted back to the man, the billionaire, the cameras, the silence that followed. Somewhere deep in her heart, a strange pull, like the faint tug of a thread connecting to lives across decades, began to tighten. And though she couldn't explain it, she felt that her life, as small and fragile as it seemed, was about to change forever. In a quiet corner of St. Louis General Hospital, the rhythmic beeping of monitors marked the passage of a life hanging between fragility and survival. The room smelled of antiseptic and faint cologne, a blend of sterility and habit. Outside, rain still pattered against the tall windows, like the city itself was mourning the fragility of men who seemed untouchable. Edward Crane lay in a crisp white hospital bed, his eyes half closed, mind drifting between pain and memory. He had always been a man of power, a titan whose decisions could sway markets and shape cities. Yet now, stripped of his office, his audience, and his pride, he felt the hollow echo of regret. "So, she's the one who saved you," whispered Victor Lang, his longtime assistant, standing beside the bed with a folder clutched in one hand. His expression was polite, but there was a subtle caution in his voice. Edward turned his gaze toward him, faint recognition in the eyes. "She? Who?" Victor cleared his throat. "A young woman, sir. She performed CPR on you, a waitress, apparently. Naomi Brooks." The words landed like a stone in Edward's chest. Naomi Brooks. The name, it had a strange resonance, familiar yet distant. It lingered in some forgotten corner of his mind, like a photo shoved into a drawer and never looked at. He closed his eyes, allowing memory to surface, decades earlier, in a city much smaller, much kinder in its naivety. A woman with honey-toned skin and hair the color of midnight, laughing under the sun, holding his hand and dreaming of a life neither of them fully understood. Her name was Clara. He had loved her fiercely, recklessly, yet the pressures of his family, the weight of legacy and expectation, had torn them apart. They had a child together, a daughter, and he had left. Edward felt the sting of that choice now with terrifying clarity. The child, the woman, the life that might have been all lost to ambition, to fear, to the unrelenting tide of wealth that promised security but delivered emptiness. Victor hesitated. "Sir, her last name?" Brooks. You've mentioned that name before, long ago. When we… Never mind. Edward's eyes narrowed. He sat up slightly, the room tilting around him. Brooks, he whispered. Clara Brooks, is she? His voice caught in his throat, strangled by disbelief. Victor watched him carefully. Sir, the coincidence. It's extraordinary. I recommend caution. She knows nothing of your identity. Perhaps you should. Edward shook his head. No. I need to know. If she is who I think she might be, I need to understand why fate brought her to me tonight. A nurse entered, bringing a tray of water and medicine. Edward sipped, his eyes fixed on the window where rain streaked the glass. For a moment, he saw Naomi as a child, running through a garden of magnolia trees, her laughter mingling with Clara's. The years fell away, leaving only the echo of what could have been. Edward reached for a pen and paper, hands trembling slightly. He began to jot down what he could remember. Names, dates, the little details he had forgotten. Every note was a fragile thread, a map back to the daughter he had lost. Outside the hospital, the city moved on as if unaware of the quiet reckoning taking place in that sterile room. Yet inside, Edward Crane felt the weight of destiny pressing down on him, the knowledge that the girl who had saved his life might also be the one who could forgive him, if only she ever knew the truth. Victor glanced at him, uncertainty written on his sharp features. Sir, we should be careful. If she finds out before we confirm. Edward raised a hand, weary but resolute. Victor, I've spent a lifetime avoiding the consequences of my choices. No more. I will face this. She saved me tonight. Perhaps now, it is my turn to save her from the consequences of my absence. He closed his eyes again, listening to the rhythmic pulse of life, thinking of the daughter he had never met. Somewhere out there, she was carrying a life he had missed entirely, shaped by love he had failed to give. And yet, by some fragile miracle, their paths had crossed again in the most unlikely, inexplicable of ways. The storm outside continued to fall, rain drumming against the windows. Edward Crane, the man who had once commanded empires, felt powerless in the face of the life he had abandoned, and yet a quiet hope, fragile and trembling, began to stir in his chest. Tonight, he would begin to make amends. The world outside Edward Crane's office glimmered with the promise of wealth and power, yet tonight it felt hollow. The city lights danced across glass walls, reflecting back the life of a man who had everything, and yet knew the profound emptiness of absence. Edward sat behind his polished mahogany desk, fingers lightly drumming against a folder labeled with a name that had haunted him since the moment he awoke. Naomi Brooks. Victor Lang stood nearby, a shadow in the corner of the room, shifting uneasily as Edward's sharp gaze bore into the night. She's just a waitress, sir, Victor said cautiously. Nothing to suggest she belongs in your world. Edward's eyes didn't leave the folder. And yet, she saved me tonight. There's courage in her I recognize. The same courage I see in Clara's eyes in my memory. I need to know more. I need to see who she is. Victor hesitated. Sir, if you involve yourself, it could be misconstrued. You've already seen what happens with one wrong move in the public eye. Edward nodded slowly. I don't care. This is different. This is about truth, about making amends, if it's still possible. A private investigator was discreetly hired the following morning. Photographs began to arrive. Naomi walking through the streets, entering her apartment building, visiting the small diner where she worked tirelessly, always with a soft smile and a determined step. Each image, each detail, revealed a young woman shaped by hardship, love, and unyielding moral strength. Edward studied them with a mixture of awe and unease. Naomi was everything he had lost: resilience, beauty, compassion, and a spark of defiance against a world that had often been cruel to her. He leaned back, imagining what it would be like to tell her that he, the man she had never known, was her father. But fear tightened his chest. Would she curse him, or could she ever forgive? Victor, observing the photographs with him, noticed the subtle change in Edward's demeanor. She's remarkable, he admitted quietly. "I've seen a lot of people, sir, few inspire this kind of emotion." Edward did not answer immediately. His mind drifted to the small apartment in trim he had seen in the photographs, modest, worn, yet spotless. He could almost smell the faint scent of laundry, the hint of medicine and tea, the faint undertone of hope. Naomi was a survivor. She had lived without him all these years, and yet she shone brighter than most people he had known. He opened a drawer and pulled out old photographs, black and white images of Clara, of Naomi as a baby. Photographs Edward had never seen in decades. He compared the faces, the curves of the smile, the eyes. The resemblance was undeniable. A shiver ran down his spine. This was his daughter, and yet he remained cautious. Edward knew that revealing the truth too soon could shatter her. She had no idea that her anonymous benefactor, the one who had already begun paying her tuition and covering her mother's medical expenses, was him. Each act of kindness had been calculated yet quiet, protective, a silent thread reaching out to her across the distance of lost years. The city outside continued to pulse with life. Streetcars rattled along tracks below, and in small apartments like Naomi's, the smell of dinner, the sound of laughter, or the quiet hush of a mother's cough carried on. Edward felt both separated and connected to that life, an invisible guardian tethered to his own guilt and hope. Victor broke the silence. "Sir, do you intend to meet her?" Edward exhaled slowly, staring at the city's reflection in the glass. "Not yet. Not until I am certain that when she learns the truth, it will not destroy her." His voice was a mixture of determination and dread. "But I will find the right way, the right time. She deserves that." For the first time in decades, Edward Crane felt powerless in a new way, not powerless in business, nor in influence, but powerless against the consequences of the choices he had made long ago. And yet, in that powerlessness, there was a strange, fragile hope that by moving carefully, by watching, by learning, he might guide the life of the daughter he had abandoned back toward the light, toward a chance for forgiveness, and toward the life she deserved. The photographs lay spread across his desk, small windows into a life he had never been allowed to touch. And Edward Crane, once a man who had commanded the world, realized that in some ways, the most important empire he had ever sought to build was the one he now sought in his daughter's trust. And somewhere in the quiet, a storm still raged outside, echoing the tension in his chest, the uncertainty of the path ahead, and the fragile, tender hope that Naomi Brooks, the girl who had saved him, could one day forgive the man who had once abandoned her. The days that followed Naomi's heroic act at the gala were quiet in the city, yet quietly transformative for her life. In a world where small kindnesses often went unnoticed, hers had stirred the first ripples of fate. It began subtly. A letter arrived at her modest apartment, the envelope thick, cream-colored, and without any return address. Naomi's brow furrowed as she opened it. Inside was a scholarship notification, full tuition coverage for the remainder of her nursing degree. A note accompanied it, unsigned, "For the brave heart that does not flinch before helping another." Naomi reread the words several times, her mind racing. She thought of the countless bills waiting on her kitchen counter, the unpaid rent, her mother's medicine. Yet here was a gift, seemingly from nowhere, that could ease the pressure she carried daily. Who would? She whispered, voice trembling, but no answer came. She tucked the letter into her worn journal and tried to return to normalcy, to work, to study. Days later, another miracle arrived, equally anonymous. Her mother's hospital bills, debts that had threatened to drown them in the previous month, were paid in full. The clinic sent receipts, noting a generous benefactor. Clara, ever intuitive, narrowed her eyes at Naomi. "Baby, do you know anything about this?" she asked softly. Naomi shook her head. "I swear, Mama, I don't know anyone who could do this." Clara placed her frail hand over Naomi's. "Sometimes help comes from places we can't see. Sometimes it's a miracle." Naomi smiled, though unease stirred in her heart. The coincidences were too precise, too purposeful. Someone was watching, someone was helping, but who? She tried to dismiss it as luck, as good fortune, but the feeling persisted, a thread tugging at her conscience, reminding her that every gift has a source. Meanwhile, Edward Crane observed from the shadows. He reviewed Naomi's school progress, monitored her mother's health improvements, and ensured each act of assistance arrived discreetly. He avoided contact, not yet daring to reveal himself. With every scholarship, every paid bill, he felt both relief and pangs of guilt. The years lost, the absences, the stolen time, could they ever be restored? Victor Lang watched Edward closely, tension in his sharp eyes. "Sir, she's becoming suspicious. She's asking questions. She might start tracing this." Edward's expression was calm, almost serene, but beneath it lay the weight of decades of regret. "Let her ask, let her search. When she discovers the truth, it must be on her terms, not mine. She deserves her dignity, even if it's my dignity that falters first." And Naomi, never one to take miracles at face value, began to notice patterns. Small notes tucked into her tuition letters, subtle kindnesses that mirrored the help she had given at the gala, hinted at intentionality. Yet she could not identify the benefactor. Was it a friend, a philanthropist, a stranger touched by her courage? She spoke aloud one evening, the apartment quiet except for the rain tapping the window pane. "Why me?" Her voice carried a mixture of hope and anxiety. "Why now?" Clara, watching her daughter's contemplative gaze, placed a gentle hand on Naomi's shoulder. "Maybe because someone knew your heart was good enough to deserve it." Naomi closed her eyes, letting the warmth of that thought settle in. She still didn't know it was Edward Crane, the man whose life she had saved, orchestrating these miracles from the distance of regret and longing. She only felt the tug of fate, gentle yet insistent, guiding her steps in a world that had often been unkind. Outside, the city continued its restless rhythm, streetcars clattering, jazz drifting from open bars, and the distant hum of traffic. But in Naomi's apartment, a quiet revolution had begun. The world, it seemed, had finally noticed her courage, her resilience. And though she did not yet know who had provided it, her heart felt a light it had not known in years, fragile, trembling, and full of hope. And Edward, watching from afar, allowed himself a rare moment of quiet relief. He had done what he could, for now. The rest, he knew, would unfold in time, a delicate balance of patience, love, and the courage to face the consequences of a lifetime lost. Life has a way of testing even the bravest hearts, and Naomi Brooks was about to face its most ruthless trial. The anonymous kindness she had received began to draw attention, small whispers among neighbors, curious glances from strangers, and the occasional envelope with a return address that led nowhere. Yet these small ripples soon became waves, and waves have a way of revealing hidden currents. Victor Lang, Edward Crane's loyal yet morally conflicted assistant, had discovered Naomi's identity, and with it, a dangerous ambition to manipulate the narrative, secure the fortune for himself, and prevent the truth from ever surfacing. Victor's plan was subtle, insidious, and cruel. He began forging documents, planting false evidence to make Naomi appear as if she were a gold digger scheming to claim Edward Crane's wealth. Anonymous emails were sent to media outlets, social media posts went viral, and the narrative was carefully constructed. Naomi Brooks, the waitress who had saved a billionaire, was now accused of fabricating medical and financial records to defraud him. The first article hit the internet in the early hours of a rainy morning. Naomi awoke to her phone buzzing endlessly. The headlines flashed, "Billionaire's savior or con artist. Naomi Brooks under investigation." Her heart sank. Confusion gave way to panic. She rushed to the apartment where her mother slept fitfully, clutching the phone. Clara stirred awake, sensing Naomi's distress. "Naomi, what's wrong?" her mother asked, voice soft but worried. Look at this," Naomi cried, handing over the phone. The words blurred through her tears. each accusation stabbing at her courage, her morality, her very identity. Clara took the phone gently, reading the headlines with a frown that deepened with every line. "Baby, they're lying," she said softly, but her voice carried the weight of helplessness. "But lies can hurt just the same." Naomi sank into the worn sofa, trembling. How could someone twist her life, her honest, tireless work, the courage she had shown, into something fraudulent? The world she had just begun to feel safe in now seemed treacherous and cold. Meanwhile, Victor watched from the shadows of Edward's office, observing the chaos he had engineered. "Sir, it's working. She's under pressure. She might retreat. She might stop asking questions." Edward's face, partially illuminated by the warm glow of his office lamp, was a mask of restraint. Yet inside, a storm raged. "Victor, stop this. You are turning kindness into poison. I will not allow her to suffer because of your ambition." Victor's jaw tightened. "Sir, the public believes her story is false. This is how we protect the estate, how we protect you." Edward's eyes hardened. "No, you are protecting nothing but your greed. If harm comes to her, I will hold you accountable. Do you understand me?" The tension was palpable, stretching across miles from Edward's office to Naomi's tiny apartment. She received phone calls from reporters, messages from strangers, and inquiries from the police, all based on Victor's carefully planted evidence. Yet Naomi, even in her panic, felt an ember of defiance ignite within her. She was tired, yes, and terrified, but her courage, the same courage that had saved Edward Crane's life, did not falter. "I did the right thing," she whispered to herself, clutching her mother's hand. "I didn't cheat. I didn't lie. I helped someone." And as Victor celebrated his cunning from afar, Edward realized that action was required. The game of shadows he had allowed to protect Naomi's identity had shifted dangerously. The threat was no longer theoretical, it was real, immediate, and capable of destroying the fragile hope he had begun to nurture for both of them. Edward picked up the phone, hands trembling slightly, and dialed a contact, a trusted lawyer outside the manipulation of Victor's schemes. He spoke quietly, precisely, and firmly. "Prepare everything to clear her name," he said. "And make it public now, no delays. She will not be harmed by lies." Outside, the storm had worsened. Rain pounded the streets, lightning illuminated the skyline, and somewhere, in a modest apartment, Naomi Brooks wept, not in despair, but in the first stirrings of determination to fight, to survive, to face a world that had tried to label her as a fraud. Victor Lang, sensing the tide turning, clenched his fists. He had underestimated the invisible hand that was now guiding Naomi's path, a man burdened by decades of regret, yet finally willing to act, willing to intervene, willing to protect what was his responsibility and what, in some quiet, unspoken way, was already his daughter. The battle lines were drawn, though Naomi did not yet know it. The stakes were life-altering, the outcome uncertain. Yet in the tension and chaos, one truth remained: courage, honesty, and the right heart have a way of surviving even the darkest storms, and sometimes, justice arrives in the most unexpected forms. The rain had stopped, leaving the streets of New Orleans glistening under the first rays of morning sunlight. Inside St. Louis General Hospital, a quiet tension hung over room 400 to a tension heavier than any storm outside. Naomi Brooks entered hesitantly, her steps echoing softly on the sterile floor. She had received the call she had dreaded yet secretly longed for. Her mother's words had finally pushed her to go, baby. Face it, sometimes truth heals, even if it hurts. Edward Crane lay in a hospital bed, pale but alive, his silver hair slightly disheveled, face etched with lines of regret and anticipation. He looked at Naomi with an intensity that made her knees weak. "Naomi," he whispered, voice raw, I you everything." She froze, the words echoing strangely in her mind. She remembered the scholarship letters, the paid medical bills, the anonymous acts of kindness, and now, standing before her, was the man who had been at the center of it all. Her heart raced. "I don't understand," Naomi said softly, trying to mask the trembling in her voice. Edward sighed, exhaustion and relief intertwining. "There's no easy way to say this. I am your father." The room seemed to tilt. Naomi's mind reeled. The man she had saved at the gala, the billionaire whose life she had fought to preserve, was the father she had never known. Her throat tightened, eyes filling with tears she had tried to contain for years. "You what?" she whispered. "I left your mother, Clara, when you were a baby," Edward said, voice breaking. "I was young, foolish, afraid of responsibility, and I thought I was doing the right thing. But I failed, not only her, but you, and for that, I am truly sorry." Naomi felt a surge of conflicting emotions: anger, confusion, grief, and something softer, something tentative, a spark of hope she hadn't expected to feel. "Why now? Why all of this?" Edward looked down at his hands, wrinkled but steady. "Because I finally realized that life is not measured by wealth or power, but by the people we love and the courage to face our mistakes. You saved my life, Naomi, and in doing so, perhaps you saved my soul. I wanted to do the same for you, in any way I could." Naomi's breath caught. The scholarship letters, the hospital bills, the anonymous help, it all made sense now. She felt both relief and sorrow, realizing how carefully Edward had guided her life from the shadows. "Victor," Naomi began, her voice barely above a whisper. "What about him? All those lies?" Edward's jaw tightened. "Victor tried to manipulate everything for his own gain. But I stopped him. The truth will be revealed. Nothing you did was wrong. It was his deception, not your courage, that nearly ruined you." Naomi sank into a chair beside the bed, tears spilling freely now. "All these years, I thought I was abandoned. That maybe I wasn't worth being found." Edward reached out, his hand trembling slightly, and held hers. "Naomi, you have always been worth everything. I lost time I can never reclaim, but I can choose to be here now. I can choose to be your father." The room was silent for a moment, filled only with the soft beep of the monitor and the distant murmur of the city. Naomi finally met his gaze, searching for sincerity. And there it was, raw, unguarded, and aching with regret and love. Clara, who had quietly entered the room a few moments earlier, placed her hand gently on Naomi's shoulder. "Baby, sometimes miracles arrive when we least expect them. Sometimes the hardest truths are the ones that save us." Naomi nodded slowly, her heart a tumult of emotions. Forgiveness would take time, and trust would need to be rebuilt. But for the first time in her life, she felt the warmth of a father's love, the fragile joy of being seen and acknowledged. Outside the hospital, the city sparkled in the late morning sun. Edward and Naomi, once strangers bound by chance, now shared a bond forged by courage, redemption, and the unrelenting hand of fate. And somewhere in the quiet, a man who had once feared responsibility finally understood what it meant to love unconditionally. Victor Lang's schemes had unraveled, his lies were exposed, his ambition thwarted. Naomi's name was cleared in the press. Justice, slow and deliberate, had found its way to the truth. And in the quiet aftermath, Edward whispered to Naomi one final time, "You are my daughter. You always were, and I will spend the rest of my days making sure you never doubt that again." Naomi looked at him, tears and a tentative smile breaking through. "I believe you, Father." And in that moment, the storm of years past finally broke, leaving only a gentle light, a light of hope, forgiveness, and a life forever changed. The city of New Orleans had weathered storms, both literal and metaphorical, and in the wake of the latest, a calm settled over Naomi Brooks' life. The morning sunlight spilled across her modest apartment, catching dust motes that danced like tiny stars, illuminating a space that had once seemed confined by struggle. Naomi had emerged from the crucible of trials stronger, wiser, and infused with a quiet confidence born of resilience. The scholarship, the anonymous aid, and the revelation of her father had been more than events. They had been lessons in courage, in forgiveness, and in the transformative power of love. Edward Crane, once a man defined by wealth and ambition, now walked beside her in a new role, a father eager to nurture, protect, and cherish the daughter he had lost to time and fear. Their relationship, though fragile, was growing on a foundation of honesty, humility, and shared experience. Together, they decided to turn the trials Naomi had endured into something lasting, something meaningful. A charitable foundation was established, dedicated to supporting young women and families facing hardship, those whose courage often went unnoticed, whose lives could be transformed by small acts of kindness. Naomi became the face and heart of this initiative, her story inspiring countless others. Victor Lang, whose greed had almost torn Naomi's life apart, faced justice. Exposed for fraud, manipulation, and attempts to defame, he was removed from Edward's company and faced legal consequences for his actions. His ambitions, fueled by selfishness, had crumbled under the weight of truth and integrity. Life, in its quiet wisdom, had delivered both punishment and reward. Naomi had learned that courage was never wasted, that doing the right thing, even when unnoticed, could shape destiny in ways one could never imagine. And Edward had learned, finally, that power without love was meaningless, that wealth could never replace the simple, profound bonds of family. One afternoon, Naomi and Edward walked together through a garden of magnolia trees, the scent of blossoms heavy in the warm summer air. It was a garden she had seen only in photographs of Clara and Edward, and now she walked through it herself, hand in hand with the father she had just begun to know. "Thank you," Naomi whispered, looking up at Edward, "not just for everything, but for showing me that life can change, that people can change, that it's never too late to do the right thing." Edward smiled, the lines of age softened by warmth and relief. "No, Naomi, thank you for reminding me that it is never too late for redemption, that courage and love can heal even the deepest wounds." Clara, standing nearby, watched her daughter and the man she had once loved with a mixture of pride and quiet satisfaction. The past, with all its mistakes and heartache, had finally been reconciled. And the future, once uncertain and fearful, now shimmered with hope. The foundation flourished, helping countless young people in need. Naomi's name became synonymous not with scandal or accusation, but with courage, resilience, and the transformative power of kindness. Edward found a new sense of purpose, not in boardrooms or bank accounts, but in guiding, nurturing, and cherishing the daughter he had once abandoned. And on quiet evenings, when the city hummed softly below, Naomi would sit with her mother and father, listening to stories of the past, sharing dreams of the future, and feeling a sense of peace that had once seemed impossible. The years of struggle, the storms of deception and fear, had given way to a life richer than any wealth, a life defined by love, courage, and the unbreakable bond of family. The story of Naomi Brooks, the poor black girl who saved a fainting billionaire and discovered he was her father, became a legend whispered across neighborhoods and shared in quiet conversations. It was not a story of wealth or fame, but of hope, redemption, and the enduring power of doing the right thing, a story proving that even in the darkest times, life can deliver miracles and love can heal the deepest wounds. As the sun set behind the city skyline, painting the river and rooftops in gold and crimson, Naomi, Clara, and Edward walked hand in hand, three hearts united by trials, by courage, and by the simple truth that family, once found, can never be lost again.